All right, now that my phone is working, or more so I have a working phone, I'm going to go through all of the parts real quickly. And so as we look at this list, hopefully you still have it. So these are all the things that should be in your bag. Now we'll look and see, well, what are those things in a moment, but a few things that might be helpful. So the things that I had asked about were first safety glasses. I guess I could put some of those in front of you, but that is not necessary. A utility knife, a lot of times people will call it a box cutter. This is an example of just like a super cheap one, but the thing is, once it gets dull, you break off at those lines. So I would pretty much, if it's not working, break that off, and then I got a new sharp blade. So that's something that could be helpful. This actually came in a kit that had those three things. I think that was like $2 or probably even less than $2 at Harbor Freight. So a lot of this stuff you can get pretty cheap. In fact, if you just want this, which is same idea, just smaller, in fact, this probably is as much as you need. I think just this was like less than $1 at Harbor Freight. But something that probably be a little bit more helpful is an actual hobby knife. So this is called a hobby knife. Now I use the big thick ones, so there are smaller ones as well, but in this class we use the bigger ones just because sometimes we're cutting some things that are a little bit stronger. So a hobby knife is going to be great because it'll get into those corners. Now you probably notice that this has the tip that's broken. If you try to pry with it, those tips will break all the time, and so it's really easy to break those tips. But if you're not prying with it, usually it stays all the way out there to the end. Other things that I had put on the form that I asked if you had, this is a small file set. Once again, this is something that I just grabbed at Harbor Freight. I think it was like $3 or $4. Depending on when you go, they may actually even have an even smaller set. So that's something that could be helpful. Otherwise, I also put sandpaper. I'll grab some of that later, but sandpaper can help sand some of those things down that end up being a little bit too big. Other things that might be helpful, this is a flush cutter. Sometimes they'll call them wire cutters. This actually is a version I grabbed from Home Depot. I think this one was $10, but I do have a version around somewhere that was from Harbor Freight. It's not quite as nice because it doesn't come quite as much to a point, but certainly it'd still work. The Harbor Freight one was, I think, $2 or less. Then other things, pliers. So needle nose. So this needle nose just means it comes to a point, and that's going to be helpful if I need to get into something that's small. And since these OpenRC projects aren't super big, getting something small is good. I like these because they're angled, and so sometimes you can't quite get in there straight with something like this. So having this angle, usually if you can get in with this, you can get in with this, but if I had to pick one or the other, I actually would pick these. But if you can get both, that would be best. Once again, I think these were maybe like $1.50, $2 at most at Harbor Freight. So it's nothing super expensive. And then one kind of last thing that isn't really needed for this project, but when you're working with 3D printing stuff, sometimes super glue is awesome. There's other stuff that works better, but super glue you usually can get for $1 or $2. I think all three of these was like $1. So And that you can even get at Walmart, Target, other places. So those are all things that might be helpful. If everything works great, you may not need any of them, but having some of those around may help you out as you work through things. If there's any of those that you really feel you need, let me know and I can try to get those to you. I do have a few people that I need to get some parts that were missing back to them. But I've only heard from a couple. So if you have something that you need, let me know as we go through. Make sure you have everything that you need. So as we go through, bearings and Allen wrenches. So those should have all been in the same bag. So here we've got the bag that the Allen wrenches. So we've got a bigger Allen wrench and a little Allen wrench. The bigger one is the one that you're gonna need. Don't lose that bigger one. The smaller one, that's if I gave you a set screw, which I almost did, for your pinion gear, which you may or may not even need. But I figured since it wasn't too expensive, I was just gonna get one for each of you. I've got 2 of the bigger bearings and then 4 of the smaller bearings. So these are gonna go with the rear axle and then these are gonna go on the front. So those are the bearings and Allen wrenches. Sometimes you'll hear them. Allen wrench is also called hex keys. Hex key or Allen wrench, basically same thing. Next thing, front and rear chassis. So there's the rear chassis, there's the front chassis. Now, a lot of times one side will look a little bit different than the other, and that's just because, well, the side that's on the printed bed will usually just have a little bit different sheen to it. Not always, but there's your front and rear chassis. Then right and left axle holder. I never remember which is which, but there you go. You should have those 2 pieces. So one is right, one is left, and to be honest, it doesn't really matter that much which is which. So right and left rear wheel axle holder, and that should be in whatever color it says. Rear wheel axle, that should be a long piece like this. So there's your rear wheel axle. There's a few things that I think the second step that we'll talk about, if this doesn't quite fit like it needs to, what things we can do there. Then spur gear. Okay, if you got a black spur gear, it should be more of a matte color. It shouldn't be shiny. I think those I printed on our Marked Forge, so that hopefully will actually hold up a little bit better than maybe some of the other ones. But the other colors, it should still also work just fine. So there's your spur gear. Next, upper and lower bomb. So there, so let's grab the gray ones. In fact, I'll even grab these ones. So upper and lower bomb. So this is my lower bomb, this is my upper bomb. Quick note, this still has the raft on it. So some printers use rafts. Technically, you could use a raft on any printer, but if you don't have to, it's preferred not to. So if you had a raft still on, you'd have to take that off. If you have some like residue, something that kind of sticks, well, that's from a raft. Hopefully you don't. Hopefully you just have your upper and lower bomb. So that's my upper, that's my lower. Then next we have a bomb block. So bomb block looks like that, and that's gonna end up going between these. See, that's not the right way, but your bomb block will go between those. Then front wheel hubs. I had those. Here are my 2 front wheel hubs. Probably should have grabbed colored ones that I think will be a little bit easier to see, but as I rotate, hopefully it's clear. So side angle, top, bottom. So those are your front wheel hubs. All right, keep going down the list. Servo pins. These might have been the one thing I didn't grab. So these are nice and small. They're not super big. They're pretty flat. And one. But you really should have two of these. So servo pins look just like that. Really, it's actually a steering push pin, but I called it a servo pin when I put it on there, so I just stuck with it. And it does have to do with the servo indirectly. And then this next section, you should have a bag like this. Now let's see if I put everything I needed to in this bag. So front axles. These are your front axles. You should have two of them. So those will actually fit into the front wheel hub. So two of those. And upper servo saver. I believe this is the upper one, and this is the lower one. Either way, you should have both. So this one looks like a mini measuring cup, kind of. And then this will fit into. Now, to be honest, this isn't super necessary if we're not going to actually put the electronics in it, but it will kind of be a spacer otherwise. So we'll still use it even if we don't do electronics. A servo holder, this is the servo holder. Now, this doesn't always work the best with all servos I've found, but at least it's something to start with. In fact, if you need something different, you feel free to cat up something different that's going to work for your servo if you get one. But in general, this probably you won't even need. So put it to the side unless you're doing electronics, then you may need it. And then, yep, that's everything there, except you probably have a couple things still. You probably have a pinion gear. This goes on the motor. And so between this is your spur gear, which will go on your rear axle, and then this will go on your motor. So that's what will spin your rear axle. So if you haven't figured out yet, it's a rear wheel drive. But once again, if you don't do electronics, this is not necessary. But I did put it there in case you ever get around to it. Now you probably have one of these two in. So this actually, if we jump down to lock pins. Okay, you probably have one of these two in your bag, but you probably have another one either in another small bag that I did later. Probably one of the bags I put in years later is the smaller piece, because I found that this didn't fit in all the ones that I tried to use, so I did do a smaller one. And that is kind of the issue with 3D printing in general, is not everything always fits, as some of you have already found out. So that's where using the same printer and testing fits as you go is probably a better option. But since I had lots of parts to do, that didn't happen quite like I wanted to. Let me adjust this so it doesn't move again. All right, so next. So those should all be black, rain light and diffuser. I put one over there. It's just like that. Again, probably not the best color choice, but that is my rain light and diffuser. Keep going, and we're starting to get into the bigger pieces. Rear wing. Rear wing looks like this. There's your rear wing. You should have that in whatever color it says. Rear motor cover. Should look like this. So this goes in the rear. That's my rear motor cover. Then center body. Center body should look like this, although this one actually didn't quite finish printing, so you shouldn't cut off at an angle there, but this is basically your center motor cover. Now, if it does break along here, you'll notice that kind of looks like a wishbone. And it is pretty easy to break, so just be careful. Once it's attached, you shouldn't have any issues, but just be careful. If it does break, I mean, you can still connect it. I've made ones with that broken. In fact, we could even later reconnect it for you if we need to. All right, then center body we just did, center lid. So center lid looks like this. So once again, yours should look really similar, but this one did cut off just a little bit, so it stopped printing just before. So it'll look pretty close to this. And the other problem with printing in clear, because if you've got some junk in the nozzle, well, and that comes out, you see it. So whereas if I was printing this in black, well, no one would probably even notice. But which is center lid. Then work our way down front. Decided to go with a different color here. So front looks just like this. Now this one later, in fact, this might be one to kind of spend some time on before you get to this step, just because it might take you some time. But I'll talk about what we'll need to do there. Nose. Let's do this black one. So here's the nose. Pretty simple. Then front spoiler. There's our front spoiler. And camera. So that probably is in a small bag for you. Maybe not, but for most, I think it is. Now, most didn't have both these parts and these parts in the same bag. Most actually had them in separate bags, but this will work to show. So we've got, as we go through camera, it's this. Left and right vein are these two. One of them's left, one's right. Now, how do you know that they're different? Well, if you put one this way, notice that this doesn't lay flat. So when they both lay flat, they should face each other. Make a little heart. Then left and right mirrors. Boom, boom. There's my left, right mirrors. Once again, lay it flat. They shouldn't look exactly the same. If they do, well, I didn't give you one of each. So those all should be the same color. So you should have 5 pieces there. And then front and rear rims and wheel nuts. So these are your wheel nuts and your front and rear rims. So I think most of you, in fact, I'll put a few options there. Yeah, actually, I didn't grab the front ones, so let me grab some front ones. So these are rear wheel, and you'll notice that it's not very round. Now, the front may not be as round as I want, but those should be a little more oblong, and your rear wheel axle should fit inside. Now, depending on how these were printed or how your rear wheel axle was printed, it may not fit quite as well, but we'll talk about that in that first step. So there's your rear rims, and if it has kind of this thing in there like that, then it's definitely the rear rims. Let's grab some front rims. All right, so front rims are a little bit more round on the inside. So if I go this side, notice that it looks a little bit smaller, so you should have 2 of each, all the same color, and then 1 wheel lock nut for each of your 4 rims. And the last thing you should have, which hopefully you have ones that look better than these, are 4 tires. So those are printed in TPU. They should be flexible, but they should be printed. So there's your parts. If you are missing any, let me know.